Cześć, nazywam się Radek Orszewski i zapraszam Was na Kanban przy kawie. Podcast o tym, jak zwinnie, sprawnie i efektywnie zarządzać pracą. Witam Was serdecznie w kolejnym odcinku podcastu Kanban przy kawie. Z tej strony Radek Orszewski i zapraszam Was na kolejny odcinek przeładowany treścią. Po pierwsze będzie wywiad. W tym wywiadzie porozmawiamy sobie o wyzwaniach, ale i o korzyściach, jakie w bardzo konkretnym kontekście projektowym może przynieść implementacja pewnych praktyk metody Kanban, praktyk mocno, powiedziałbym, skustomizowanych właśnie pod środowisko projektowe. Zaczniemy właściwie od pewnych korzyści, które w takim środowisku właśnie te praktyki mogą przynieść, a więc na przykład, nie wiem, czy ktoś się z Was spotkał z takim problemem, jak zbyt dużo czasu spędzonego na spotkaniach, albo brak wiedzy o tym, jak podejmujemy decyzje, co nazywamy po kanbaniarsku brakiem jawnej, jasnej polityki. Jeśli więc pracujecie w firmie, w której słowo projekt jest odmieniane przez wszystkie przypadki, jeśli zarządzacie projektem, programem, portfolio, to jest być może dla Was bardzo cenna doza informacji tam ukrytych. Co jeszcze z tych treści? Premierze tego odcinka, tak mniej więcej czasowo, towarzyszy również premiera dwóch ciekawych materiałów. Otóż jest to przewodnik po zastosowaniu Kanbanu właśnie w świecie projektów, programów i portfolio oraz towarzyszący mu plakat. Obydwa te materiały zostały spolszczone specjalnie dla Was, dla ułatwienia albo korzystania z tego, albo dystrybucji dla Waszych współpracowników, podwykonawców, i po wywiadzie opiszę pokrótce o tym, na czym właściwie ten Kanban w projektach, programach i portfolio będzie polegał, jeśli zdecydujecie się go użyć. Dla jasności, niekoniecznie zamian za coś, co robicie obecnie, ale może oprócz tego, co robicie teraz. Zapraszam do wywiadu. For the second time in the history of the podcast, my special guest is Teodora Bozheva. Would you like to introduce yourself, Teodora, to our listeners?
Hi, Radek. Thank you very much for your invitation. I'm really pleased to be your guest. I'm Teodora Bozheva. I'm CEO of Very Process Agility, consultancy and training company in Bilbao, in Spain. I've been working with David Anderson on developing the Kanban maturity model, and for the last many years already, Very Process and I are working with project organizations, helping them to improve their management practices and habits with Kanban, and recently with the Kanban maturity model. And I hope that you enjoy this conversation.
Yeah, we'll try to make it enjoyable, but also, I would say, informative for our listeners, because like you said, you work for many times with the project organizations, and this is the topic of our episode today. So we want to talk about projects, or using Kanban in projects, let's just say environments or ecosystem. It's not a secret that this episode will be around, let's just say, an event of publishing in Polish, something what we called a Kanban guide for projects, programs, and portfolio management. And I couldn't imagine a better person to talk about it than you, because I know that you have long background in the projects traditionally perceived, let's just say, project management. So I would like to start with a question. Teodora, do you have any example, anonymized or not, of maybe a company, industry, where applying Kanban practices to managing projects, the way we understand it traditionally, really helped? And if yes, what kind of problems were solved with it?
Yes, I'm happy to share that we have many examples, and not anonymized examples. I mean, examples of companies with their names, and those companies have even presented, shared their experience in case studies, and also in a conference that we organized last year in Spain, which is called Flow, and was dedicated to project and portfolio management with Kanban. So a number of companies have already presented their experience. So I'm going to give you some names, and I'm going to explain you what they have achieved by means of using Kanban, and recently the Kanban maturity model. Well, first, I would say the very first company, and not IT company, an engineering industrial company that I started working with in the field of project management, explicitly helping them to improve their project management process. That was back in 2013.
10 years ago.
Almost, 10 years ago. 10 years ago. I didn't realize this earlier. And their name is Somabe, and it's here in the Basque Country. and they are designing, developing, and producing specialized machines. And every machine is a separate project for them, and so they are managing all their work by means of projects. And they decided that they wanted to take advantage of the practices of Kanban and integrate them with their project management process. That was the very first company 10 years ago. After that, we've been working with a Kitty Group, with Ulma Handling Systems, very interesting company, a large company, developing complex projects because they are a logistic company who builds, designs, constructs, and builds facilities for baggage handling in airports and also warehouses. So they really have very complex, from technical perspective, technical solution projects, large duration projects with many stakeholders, with suppliers, delivered in different countries and different continents. So really projects that are not easy to manage. And they use the Kanban. In fact, they were one of the first companies to also use the Kanban maturity model for improving their project management process and the culture of the company altogether. So really very interesting case. They presented it last year in September in the conference in Bilbao. Another company that is doing great job is Packard, who are developing air conditioning systems for buses and for trains. We have another large insurance company in Spain using Kanban and the Kanban maturity model for improving their project management practices and culture and the agility of the entire company. So I would say many companies, I counted them. In fact, by today, we've been working with 26 companies, helping them in project management with Kanban. 16 of them have been using the Kanban maturity model. What kind of problems they have managed to resolve? First, and very important for a company at the first step, is obtaining global visibility in the status of all their projects. Well, project by project, of course, but also at the level of portfolio, because this is absolutely important nowadays for managing any business. Then improving the communication, improving the alignment between all the business units, especially of large organizations who are involved in the project development and delivery. Faster in the identification of issues and problems in the projects, faster resolution of all these problems. Reduced meeting times. I really love this especially when I hear from executive management that they realize that they have reduced the time of their meeting, because usually in the beginning they are complaining from spending lots of time in meetings, and in parallel to this, complaining from inefficient communication. So this is always this contradiction, that how can we stay such a long time in meetings and complain from ineffective communication. So they are improving in both aspects, and they are reducing their meeting time. Better teamwork, better labor climate in the company, less stress in the organization. And something really very, very important for the businesses is keeping the projects under control and meeting delivery dates. So this is really very important. Ulma Handling Systems, for example, when they started constructing their solution, their network of Kanban systems for managing their projects, that was just the moment when the first lockdown in Spain happened in the beginning of the pandemic. And well, for a moment I was thinking that, well, that moment, because we did not know how the pandemic would influence the continuation of this initiative, etc. But in fact, what happened was just the opposite of my expectation, because they realized that precisely because of all the restrictions that we had for traveling and for visiting different countries where their projects were delivered, they needed really a good project management with Kanban, precisely to reduce the need of traveling and to have all the information about the status of the projects that were happening in different countries and different continents. So that was really very helpful in that critical period for the company.
Yeah. Teodora, thank you very much for so many examples. I was just trying to count in my head, all the examples of industries that you listed. They definitely don't come to mind when we think about, let's just say, agile approach, definitely not IT, what you listed here. But I would say the problems are common. I mean, I believe we can use what you said, reduced time spent in meetings, as a really tagline to promote this, this episode, because I don't think we have many companies where people would not, let's just say, complain about too much time spent in the meetings and still not knowing where we are with the project or process or product or however they see it. But today we want to talk about projects, programs, and portfolio management. And I'm wondering, we probably have a portion of our listeners who are familiar with Kanban. They probably know the 6 core practices. We probably may have listeners who will be attracted by the word project management to it. Question is, are Kanban practices for project, program, and portfolio management in any way different than the one that they can find as core practices, right? So like visualization, limiting work in progress, etc. Is any of these practices done somehow, I don't know, strongly different for project environment?
Strongly different, I would say no, because the general practices are the same general practices in the Kanban method. However, their implementation in the context of projects is slightly different, and simply it's because of the structure of the projects and because of the scope of work that has to be managed. And also the duration, the fact that also in projects, typically many stakeholders are involved, also suppliers, so they need to have access on some visibility to be properly involved in conducting the project work. So this makes the instance, or let's say so, of the practices slightly different. But in general, we are talking about visualizing the work at team level, at project level, at program level, at portfolio level. We are talking about managing the flow. Here we find differences, mainly the project organizations face differences in managing the work because you know that with Kanban we introduce them to managing the flow of work in the project with the objective to optimize the outcomes, the final results of all the projects for the organization, and also achieving improvement in the processes and in the culture, in the way people relate in teams, between teams, in the entire organization. So these are the outcomes, the effects that are observed that happen in the organizations. The policies, of course, they have to define policies. You will be surprised here that they discover policies. Usually, project organizations have processes, defined processes. But still, when we start defining the policies for managing the flow of work, they discover that, for example, they do not have policies for selecting a project from the portfolio to get started for the next period. So it might be, they might call it sometimes prioritization of the projects or simply selection of projects, but these are policies that are missing. Or policies for how much work we have to plan for the next week. How do we plan the work for the next week of our team? So, in general, the work is planned in the Gantt chart, but there are so many things that are happening in the context of the teams in the project. So, they have to plan their week. So, how do they plan their week in order to achieve what is expected, but to respond adequately to all the changes in the circumstances in the project? So these are things that, again, the general practices are the same, but their implementation in the context of project organizations is specific for this context. So they are taking advantage of the general practices applied to their managing their work.
Yeah, thank you, Teodora. What you just said, of course, is something what I also share very often, that, you don't switch to Kanban. You basically apply Kanban practices to whatever your context is, right? And here we talk about specific maybe tools like the Gantt chart that you mentioned.
And if I can add something,
go ahead.
thank you. They take advantage of all the information and data that come from their workflow for planning their projects. in such a way that they can get more predictability. So in project management, we always have the phase of planning, which is not just in the beginning. I mean, they have to plan and replan continuously, which is rather adjusting the initial project schedule in order to meet the objectives of the projects. But usually companies coming from predictive project management methods, they use different methods for estimating the delivery dates. And what we are teaching them, and they learn very quickly and take lots of advantage from it, is using the flow related data for lead time, for type of work, or for example, time of waiting of the work in queues, for example, waiting on suppliers, waiting on other teams, in order to optimize their scheduling and in such a way achieve greater predictability for their projects.
Okej. Małym przerywnikiem reklamowym będą dzisiaj dwie rzeczy. Pierwsza to jest chyba powtórzona prośba o interakcję z nami na YouTubie. Odpalamy tam kanał, na którym na razie są materiały towarzyszące, wizualizujące odcinki podcastu, ale w przyszłości, i to już niedługiej, znajdą się materiały zupełnie niezależne. Podpowiem nawet, że powstające na Wasze życzenie. Jeśli jesteście więc tym zainteresowani, zainteresowane, zapraszam, dajcie tak zwanego suba, wejdźcie na YouTube i tam wyszukajcie Kanban przy kawie. Druga sprawa to jest właśnie kwestia projektowa, a właściwie szkoleniowa. Jeśli jesteście grupą project managerów, zajmujecie się właśnie czymś takim i chcielibyście zrozumieć Kanban, to będę teraz konsekwentnie poszerzał szkolenia kanbanowe właśnie o wspomniany zakres KPPM, czyli Kanban for Project and Portfolio Management. Jeśli chcielibyście być pionierami takiej grupy, taką grupą pionierską, to zapraszam Was do kontaktu. Jak zwykle możecie złapać mnie na mediach społecznościowych albo na podcast @Kanban przy kawie. Teraz ciąg dalszy wywiadu, a po nim jeszcze więcej właśnie o przewodniku oraz plakacie. You mentioned a few times Kanban maturity model, and I'm pretty sure that the listeners who are more familiar with the Kanban method, they know it's an evolutionary approach. How does it apply to applying Kanban to projects? Do we need to switch completely to some set of practices, or from your experience, how does it look? What's the typical path of, let's just say, entering the land of mixing Kanban and projects?
The path is evolutionary. I mean, no surprise here. Of course, we cannot switch from predictive management to project management with Kanban from one day to the other. But at the same time, if the listeners are familiar with the Kanban maturity model, project organizations need to see the status of a project almost from day one. So they need to see the status of the project work end to end, in the end-to-end flow. So this is maturity level 2 on the Kanban maturity model. So for project organizations, we help them, in fact, to start from maturity level 2, visualizing the project flow end to end, but at the same time, especially in large organizations with different teams of specialists involved in developing this project, we help them, or these teams need to start managing their work with their Kanban team boards. So we construct this solution almost from day one, designing the boards for the teams of specialists and designing the board or a swim lane that somehow visualizes the work, the end-to-end work for the project for all the teams in such a way that all the teams of specialists, usually departments or business units in the companies, they have control and they see the work that they are involved in many projects. But for each one of the projects, they can also see what is the status of the project. So this is a peculiarity for project organizations, but they really need these two levels of visibility on project work, and therefore we help them to start with this level. And the Kanban maturity model, this is in fact maturity level 2. And this is, you asked me whether there could be an evolutionary approach to the project management process and the organization, because you know that through the Kanban maturity model, we evolve the entire organization. So really these two things happen. But the project management process evolves and the organization in terms of culture, practices, and outcomes evolves as well. So how does the project management process evolve? Maturity level 2, they see the work visually from end to end for the entire workflow. They see the work for the team levels. They start thinking in terms of work items and work types. They start thinking from the perspective of the customer. So they really put the customer in the center of making our decisions and discussing what we are doing and what is the objective of the project. They align all the teams involved in the project in developing something that brings value to the customer. So this is already an important change to the typical project thinking focused on what we are doing, inward thinking, inward orientation. And also, they start defining the policies. These are the policies that are typically missing of managing work between the teams of specialists, typically in a matrix or a hierarchical organization, for managing the work in the project between the different teams that might be involved in the project. So this is what happens at the first stage. So maturity level 2 is about achieving a consistent process for managing the projects. But of course, at the next level, which is maturity level 3, the practices help them balance the workflow across different projects, different programs. If the company is smaller, it might be even portfolio level. Okay, so and this brings not only changes and evolution to the process of project management, but also to the entire company as a culture, because now they are not simply focused on delivering on customer expectations, customer requirements, but they want to continuously satisfy and deliver successfully on all customers' requirements and expectations. And they also want to achieve this through a stable flow across the organization, reducing the lack of equilibrium between, for example, teams involved in different stages of the projects. So, evolving the process of project management also brings changes in or evolution to the culture of the company and the outcomes of the company. So, this is what we are observing as a change in the organizations. Well, they are observing and they are happy with it.
Sounds interesting. It may attract some people from project management world to think or consider applying Kanban. I'll give you the example. Today I got a message from one of the podcast's followers, hopefully also listeners. He said, I started looking for some sources about how to manage projects in more agile way. Although I so far run my projects according to guidance of IPMA. He mentioned one of the organizations standing behind some standardization of the processes. And I'm wondering, from perspective of such person, if I do the IPMA or if I do any other type of project management, and I'll decide to try Kanban, does it, force me to drop any of existing practices? Like I need to drop my Gantt charts or Microsoft project or anything like this? What do you have to say to such people?
They will not drop essential practices. But because they might decide to substitute some of them by other practices. But what is very important to understand is that Kanban is not a project management method. So Kanban will never substitute any project management method. It's not going to substitute PMBOK, it's not going to substitute IPMA, it's not going to substitute Prince2, but it complements them. It complements them by means of the visual management practices and the principles for managing the workflow. This is different from the other approaches. So combining the other approaches like PMBOK of Project Management Institute, IPMA or Prince2, and the practices that come from managing the workflow and using visual practices for visual management is that makes the life of the project managers and the portfolio management offices easier. So they will continue having Gantt charts. However, they are going to have in order to define their Gantt charts, they will take advantage from the flow related data and they will have greater visibility in defining the work packages in their Gantt chart. They will still need, especially in larger projects, you cannot build an airport without a Gantt chart. I mean, in order to start talking with the entire consortium of companies involved in such a project,
Right.
you have to have a kind of temporal planning for the activities that will be conducted. So, of course, they will continue using Gantt charts. However, they will have Gantt charts that are more reliable because they are based on data that come from real systems, and these data provide more predictability than any other method.
Okay, sounds like going away from wishful thinking, which we have in many industries.
Absolutely. All the laws for managing the workflow are scientific laws and principles, therefore they are working. So when they take advantage of scientific principles, managing based on scientific principles and real world data, of course it works better. And in addition, the Gantt chart is showing the work on the X of time. But the Kanban boards are showing the status of work, of real status of the work, and on projects and portfolio of projects. So the combination of these two tools for managing the projects is that really saves them from lots of headaches because they continuously see what is the real status of the project on the Kanban board. They don't have to ask the people to report something or to report some data in some systems in order to make some calculations afterwards and get an idea what would be the status of the project. They see it continuously. And all the people take care of the information on the Kanban boards because they continuously make decisions based on this information. So they really take care of it. So this is what they really take lots of advantage. They get aware of problems, of risks, of overloading of people that afterwards can affect the entire workflow. So the project and portfolio management with Kanban is a complement to the existing project management bodies of knowledge, and will always be like this. So it's simply helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I think by explaining this in details, and of course we could hear it with like a hands-on experience, maybe we will reduce the fear, let's just say, of exploring what is in project, program, and portfolio management with Kanban. And it doesn't mean that you need to drop or lose identity of whatever practices you have with you now. Teodora, thank you very much for the conversation. Always pleasure to talk to you. Yeah, I hope we'll have one more or more occasions in the future to talk, but thank you for all the explanation that you shared today with our listeners.
Thank you very much, Radik. It was a pleasure to talk with you and your audience.
Tyle wywiadu z Teodorą. Dla jasności wrzucę w opisie tego podcastu linki do tych materiałów, do tych case studies, o których ona opowiadała. Oczywiście były to case study, można powiedzieć, z jej gruntu działania, a więc z Hiszpanii, ale one są opisane w języku angielskim, więc nie będziecie mieli problemu ze zrozumieniem kontekstu. A teraz czas na to, żeby powiedzieć sobie, co to właściwie jest ten KPPM. Używamy takiego skrótu, żeby nazwać właśnie Kanban w projektach, programach i portfolio. Projekty z nami są i pewnie jeszcze bardzo długo będą. Nawet w firmach, które dużą część swojej pracy realizują zwinnie, będą takie rzeczy, które będą zasługiwały, do których właściwym podejściem, jeżeli chodzi o ich realizację, jest właśnie podejście projektowe. Tak jak powiedziała Teodora w wywiadzie, czy używacie metod opisanych w PMBOK-u, czy Prince2, czy IPMA, nieważne jaka jest tutaj wykładnia projektowa, często też w tym świecie projektowym pojawia się słowo zwinność, no to tak naprawdę napotykamy, powiedziałbym, na pewne określone, powtarzalne problemy. I To, co Teodora zrobiła, tworząc ten przewodnik na podstawie swoich doświadczeń, to jest, można powiedzieć, zaadoptowała praktyki Kanbanu, metryki, wizualizacje na potrzeby właśnie pracy, która nie jest ciągłą pracą usługową, niekoniecznie musi polegać na budowaniu i odkrywaniu produktu, ale właśnie jest czymś, co realizujemy na poziomie zespołów działających względem jakiegoś celu, czyli projektu. Nazwa przewodnika mówi również o tym, że Kanban może być zastosowany do zarządzania programem, a więc jakąś wiązką projektów, albo nawet portfolio, a więc całym portfelem, powiedzielibyśmy po polsku, programów, a te składające się dopiero z projektów. Bardzo często właśnie tego typu portfolio boardy czy portfolio wizualizowane w postaci jakichś Gantt chartów to jest coś, czym operują zarządy, właściciele, stakeholderzy w organizacjach. Okazuje się, że na wszystkich tych poziomach mamy pewne problemy. Te problemy, o których mówiła dzisiaj Teodora. I moi drodzy, mówimy sobie, że w ramach właśnie tego środowiska warto zastanowić się nad kilkoma, powiedziałbym, ważnymi praktykami. Pierwszą jest oczywiście widoczność, a więc to, czy my wiemy, gdzie jesteśmy z danym projektem, czy my wiemy, gdzie ten projekt jest w swoim cyklu rozwojowym, w swoim cyklu życiowym, w jakiej fazie. I można powiedzieć, jest to właśnie realizacja tej pierwszej praktyki wizualizacji. Tutaj mówimy po angielsku visibility, a więc tej widoczności, przejrzystości tego, gdzie my z tą pracą jesteśmy. Druga sprawa to to, że w świecie projektowym, szczególnie kiedy nie mamy właśnie dedykowanych na przykład zespołów, bardzo często będziemy mieli różnego rodzaju, powiedziałbym, nieefektywności związane z przepływem, z tym, że w sposób ciągły i zbalansowany nie będziemy kontrolowali czy zapewniali przepływu tej wartości, a więc być może będziemy tutaj mieli zmiany po stronie klienta i jego wymagań, po stronie priorytetów, po stronie ryzyk i tym wszystkim chcielibyśmy zarządzić. To pewnie nam pasuje do praktyki manage flow, zarządzania przepływem z metody Kanban. Nie padło jeszcze tutaj nic o skupieniu, a właśnie to skupienie na właściwych potrzebach klienta, tak jak mówiła Teodora, na postawieniu klienta i jego potrzeb w centrum, na potrzebach biznesu, aby ten projekt był sensowny, rentowny, dobry wizerunkowo oraz można powiedzieć priorytetach strategicznych firmy, to jest również coś, co potrafi kuleć, jeśli nie mamy dobrze zbudowanych wokół tego pewnych praktyk. Feedback, a więc pętle zwrotne, tutaj już na samym początku powiedziałem o tym, że w wielu firmach, nawet to co Teodora opowiadała, mamy takie poczucie, że spędzamy dużo czasu na tworzeniu raportów, dashboardów, na spotkaniach, na których czasami właśnie opisujemy czy pokazujemy te elementy, a okazuje się, że one właściwie nie dostarczają takiego, powiedzielibyśmy, actionable feedback, a więc feedbacku, na podstawie którego możemy podjąć jakieś decyzje. I tutaj w przewodniku, zapraszam oczywiście do jego lektury, znajdziecie takie informacje, jakie konkretne spotkania, jak wyglądające można byłoby prowadzić, czy na poziomie pojedynczego projektu, czy programu, czy właśnie portfolio. To, na co zwróciła uwagę również moja rozmówczyni, to jest kwestia kultury, a więc tego, jak my pracujemy, jak my właściwie cenimy takie rzeczy jak transparencja, jak współpraca, jak orientacja na klienta i to wszystko również może zostać, można powiedzieć, wspomagane, może być wspomożone przez zastosowanie praktyk Kanbanu, czy na tym poziomie podstawowym zespołu, czy też na poziomach wyższych. Pamiętajmy o tym, że zastosowanie Kanbanu również będzie nam w takim świecie projektowym dostarczało cennych metryk przepływu danych, na podstawie których będziemy mogli dokonywać, tak jak powiedziała Teodora, replanowania, a więc regularnego czy ciągłego przebudowywania naszego planu, no bo tak jak bardzo ładnie padło, nie jesteśmy w stanie takich bardzo złożonych projektów realizować bez Gantt charta, bez Microsoft Projectu czy tego typu rozwiązań, ale nie stoi to na przeszkodzie, żebyśmy gromadzili dane związane z przepływem i żebyśmy tych danych używali do właśnie, można powiedzieć, pewnej adiustacji, pewnego przebudowywania tego planu. Być może zakres nadal jest skończony i stały, być może gdzieś musimy podziałać na tej linii czasowej, ale skąd o tym wiedzieć, gdzie my jesteśmy oraz skąd wiedzieć, o jakie wartości musimy jakieś czynności w naszej strukturze elementów pracy przesunąć czy przedłużyć, to nie musi być zgadywanie, to nie musi być myślenie życzeniowe. No i w sumie jedna bardzo istotna sprawa, którą próbowałem uwypuklić moim ostatnim pytaniem, to jest kwestia tego, że zastosowanie praktyk Kanbanu do project managementu nie jest absolutnie czymś, co powoduje, że musimy z czegoś zrezygnować. Jeżeli nasza branża poprzez regulacje, jeżeli nasza branża poprzez, można powiedzieć, nawet pewnego rodzaju taką, otoczkę pewnej grupy społecznej, tak, wymaga, żebyśmy używali konkretnych narzędzi, konkretnych terminologii, chociażby żeby móc wystartować w jakimś projekcie, musieli się wykazać zgodnością właśnie z jakimś Prince2 czy czymś takim, to jest jak najbardziej ok i nadal możemy to w ten sposób realizować, natomiast możemy sobie pomóc, bo możemy tak na dobrą sprawę wzbogacić nasz narzędziownik tego, co stosujemy, jeżeli chodzi o narzędzia, o wizualizację, o metryki, właśnie tym, co podpowiada nam przewodnik KPPM. Jeśli to brzmi ciekawie, to proponuję, żebyście czym prędzej kliknęli w linki, które znajdziecie w opisie tego odcinka, czy we wpisie towarzyszącym temu podcastowi. Tak jak powiedziałem, przewodnik oraz jego wizualizacja w postaci plakatu w wersji polskojęzycznej znajdują się do pobrania. Zapraszam do lektury, ona nie jest długa. Natomiast bardzo będę otwarty na Wasz feedback. Jeśli jest to coś, co chcecie w cudzysłowie sprzedać project managerom w Waszej firmie, jeśli sami jesteście w takiej roli i chcecie tego zacząć używać, dajcie znać, bo myślę, że możemy tutaj też podzielić się w przyszłości ciekawymi Waszymi doświadczeniami. A więc jeśli ktoś powie, hej, ja tak robię, albo zacznie robić i będzie miał jakąś historię do podzielenia się, to również właśnie w takim cyklu, chociażby Kanban w Twojej branży, również project management może znaleźć tutaj ciekawe miejsce i ciekawe, lokalne, polskie case study. Zapraszam więc do tego, ale pewnie zanim pojawi się case study, mogą pojawić się pytania. Tradycyjnie zapraszam z nimi pod adres mailowy podcast@kanbanprzykawie.pl albo na mediach społecznościowych, na których lubicie, lajkujecie podcast, szczególnie na LinkedInie, za co wszystko im bardzo serdecznie dziękuję. Tyle na dziś. Zostawiam Was troszkę z zadaniem domowym lektury, przejrzenia tego, co się w poradniku, co się w przewodniku oraz w plakacie mieści i do usłyszenia już niedługo.